Hello everyone, and welcome to the next video in the course where we will be looking at recursive functions. Okay, so what are recursive functions? A recursive function is just a function that calls itself. So for example, we have a function called printName, which takes in a parameter of the name, and as you can see in the function body, it calls the function printName, which is itself. So a recursive function is just a function that calls itself. Okay, so what is an example that we can use to understand them? And an example is factorials. Okay, so we can find a factorial using a recursive function, and that's what we are going to be looking at now after we look at a simple example first. Okay, so let's look at a simple example first. So okay, so let's write the printName function here and see what it does. Okay, so we'll write void printName, we'll say string name. Okay, and in the body what we will do is we will just output the name followed by an end line, and we will just call the function and just pass in the name. Okay, so as you can see here, all it was, as you remember from the PowerPoint, we are just calling the function that it is in. So printName. Okay, great. So now let's try this in the main function. So write printName, and I will put Bob. Okay, so let's save and run this, and what you will see here is that what you will see here is that this could cause the computer to crash because it's just going to keep going. And as you saw before, I had to change Bob from the single quotation marks to the double quotation marks like this, and that's because we tend to use the single marks with characters as opposed to strings. Okay, so now if we save and run this, I should get a stream just saying Bob, and it should fill out the terminal. Okay, so as you just saw, it just printed a lot of Bobs on the terminal. Okay, so that's a simple example of a recursive function, and as you can see here, I have the error. Okay, so now let's look at a factorial function. Okay, so let's create a function for a factorial, and what we will do is we will say int because it's going to return a number, and we'll say factorial, and let's say that the parameter is called n, so int n. And just in case you don't know what a factorial is, a factorial is just it just times all the numbers before it. So for example, if you have a factorial of 3, it would be 3 times 2 times 1. Okay. Okay, great. So now let's look at what we will write in the body of the function. Okay, so what we are going to write in the function body is, firstly, we have to know that if we are past 1, we should return 1 because the first factorial is 1. Okay, so let's write that firstly, and you'll see why that is important later. So if n equals 1, that is a double equals, we will return 1. Okay, now why is this important? So as you know from the previous example, we have to have set a condition on where the recursive function will stop, otherwise it will just go on forever. Okay, so the factorial function is going to stop when n equals 1. And this is also important because the next part of our code is, if it isn't 1, what we will say is return n times factorial n take 1. Okay, so now this might be somewhat hard to understand, but let's make this easier with a diagram. Okay, so let's look at this. Let's look at this diagram here. So let's say we wanted the factorial of 3. So we pass in 3, and as you see from the code, if we pass in 3, it will check if 3 is equal to 1, which it isn't. So it will say return 3 times factorial 3 take 1, as you can see here. Okay, so it says 3 times factorial 3 take 1, and now what the program will have to do is, since it doesn't know what factorial 3 take 1 is, it will have to go on and find factorial of 3 take 1. Okay, so what is the factorial of 3 take 1? It will be, what it will do is it will just call the function and pass in 3 take 1, which is 2. Okay, so let's have a look at that in the code. So we pass in 2 here, so 2 isn't equal to 1, so it will return n, so 2 times factorial of 2 take 1. And what is that? It will be, as you can see here, we have 2 times factorial 2 take 1. And now what it has to check is factorial of 2 take 1, which is the factorial of 1. And as you can see here, that equals 1. And if we look back at our code, if we input 1, it checks if the input is equal to 1. And since it is, it will return 1. Okay, so now hopefully you can see this recursive pattern, and from what we found out here, it can work out the above. Okay, so factorial 1 is 1. So now we can replace this factorial 2 take 1 with 1. So 2 times 1 is 1. And then that was the answer to factorial 3 take 1. So 2 times 1 is 2. So now we just do 3 times 2. And 3 times 2 is 6. And the factorial of 3 therefore is 6. Okay, great. And that's all there is to recursive functions. Now, I will say that if you are a beginner to programming, this may seem confusing at first. When I first was introduced to recursive functions, it took me about 2 or 3 days to get the hang of it. But I'm sure as you progress, you will understand it, especially when you come to having cases where you will need to use recursive functions. Okay, so now let's test this in the code. So let's see if this code actually works. Now what we will do is we will say output factorial of 3. And as we said, it was 6. So let's save and run this. I will restart the host. Okay, so as you can see here, we get 6. And this function will work for any number. So let's say, okay, so now let's look at factorial of 5, check if that's right. And it says 120. So 5 times 4, 5 times 4 times 3 times 2 times 1 is, let's see what that is, 5 times 4, let's see what 5 times 4 times 3 times 2 times 1 is 120. Okay, so we can see that the function works. Okay, so thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video.